this is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
Lowe's knows Sundays are for football, so tackle your home improvement projects by Saturday and earn your Sunday with great deals on LG and Bosch appliances, select Bounty and Swiffer cleaning products, and more. Then once your to-do list is done, get ready to kick back, relax, and enjoy the game. Shop in-store or online now and earn your Sunday with help from Lowe's, official partner of the NFL. Wasabi is purpose-built to free your business from skyrocketing storage costs and fees. Wasabi is the go-to provider for professional and collegiate sports teams around the world. Check out Wasabi's AI-enabled intelligent media storage, Wasabi Air, to the industry's only cloud storage service with triple protection against cyber criminals. Wasabi, driving innovation in data storage for up to 80% less than market competition. Try for free at wasabi.com. Wasabi Hot Cloud Storage, proud partner of iHeart Podcast Network.
This is the Late Round Podcast with your host, JJ Zacharisa.
What's up, everyone? It's JJ Zacharisa, and in this episode 1062 of the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, thanks for tuning in. I know I sound like I just smoked 8 packs of cigarettes. This is what happens when you travel for Thanksgiving and you've got a toddler running around. So apologies for my voice being even more annoying than it usually is. I also know that a lot of trade deadlines have passed. I know that you can't totally act on all the buy and sell recommendations from this show anymore. With that being said, I do still have some buys and sells on today's episode because they can help you with knowing how confident to feel about certain players. As we get closer to the end of the season, this show will turn into more ads and drops. The final week, week 17, it's always the quickest episode of the season because it's just filled with those ads and drops. But I did want to get that caveat out of the way before we dig into this week's list of transactions. Let's do that now. Add Pat Bryant. So the first 3 transactions this week, they're all Denver Broncos. Let's start with Pat Bryant. His usage has been trending up over the last handful of weeks. I've talked about him plenty on the Sleeper Show. But we saw an interesting shift in week 13. He ended up running 5 more routes and seeing 4 more targets than Troy Franklin. That's something that we hadn't seen all season long. Bryant had a 77% route share against Washington, and that was in a game that was coming out of the bye. That was a season high for him. We know that it can take some time for rookies to see more expanded roles in their offenses. This is definitely noteworthy. So look at Pat Bryant this week off the waiver wire. Sell Courtland Sutton. So if you have Courtland Sutton, you're probably feeling a little bit excited after what he did in week 13. He scored 17.2 PPR points against the Commanders, which was his best output since week 5. The problem, though, he only had a 14% target share. That was his lowest since week 6. Sutton just really hasn't been getting it done since the first month or so of the season. From week 6 onward, his last 7 games, he's averaged just 10.4 PPR points per game. He was at 16.1 PPR points per game across his first 5. A huge reason for this is competition. Other Broncos receivers, the aforementioned Pat Bryant, the aforementioned Troy Franklin, they've emerged. And as a result, since week 5, Courtland Sutton has a 17.7% target share per game rate. Before this stretch, that target share per game rate was almost 23%. Now, if the schedule looked good for Denver, it'd be one thing. But in their remaining 4 games of the fantasy season, they get the Raiders, Packers, Jags, and Chiefs. He might be fine against the Raiders, and I don't mind his perimeter matchup against the Jags. But all 3 playoff matchups, Green Bay, Jacksonville, and Kansas City, they're all against bottom half opponents by adjusted fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. You can usually spot a sell candidate by looking at production and then looking at the usage. And right now the production is up for Courtland Sutton, but the usage, it was still kind of down. That's why he's a sell after that week 13 performance. Sell RJ Harvey. Okay, this is the last one about the Denver Broncos, I promise. And I will say, I don't think this transaction, I don't think it's one that you desperately need to act on. But it's something that we should probably talk about. RJ Harvey's usage without J.K. Dobbins, it's been okay. It hasn't been great. In week 13, we actually saw Harvey's usage decline versus his other game without Dobbins. He was on the field for just 47% of Denver's offensive snaps. That number was 61% in week 11. His route share was only 29% against the Commanders. The last time we saw the Broncos, it was 48%. Fortunately, when he's been on the field, his workload has been okay. Harvey's been around a 65% running back rush share and a 9% target share. That can yield usable results, as we saw in week 13. And hey, maybe that workload improves. The problem here, though, is twofold. Number one, he outplayed his peripherals in week 13, so naturally, he's more of a sell than a buy. But also, look at that playoff schedule. I just talked about it with Courtland Sutton. The Broncos get the Packers, Jags, and Chiefs during their 3 playoff weeks. That gives the Broncos a bottom 5 schedule for running backs by adjusted points allowed in weeks 15, 16, and 17. Each of those teams in this data is pre-Monday Night Football, but each of those teams rank as bottom 10 opponents for running backs according to my schedule-adjusted numbers. So again, this isn't something that you absolutely need to do. RJ Harvey's a rookie. He could see more work as the season goes on. There's no doubt. But it's definitely a good thing to have in the back of your mind if you're relying on Harvey during the playoffs, which I know a lot of you probably are. Add Blake Corum. I've talked about Blake Corum so often on this show, this can be brief. We can talk about this really quickly. He's arguably the most valuable handcuff in all of fantasy football, and yet he's still rostered in just 16% of Yahoo leagues. And he has some standalone value too. He's averaged a 41% running back rush share per game rate over his last 6. That's resulted in 10 rush attempts per game during that time frame. As I said in the 15 Transactions newsletter, 'tis the season to handcuff. Blake Corum should be rostered everywhere. Add Isaac Tesla. So Amon-Ra St. Brown had an ankle injury on Thanksgiving. He could miss some time. Right now, as it stands today, it sounds like he's a game time decision for Thursday Night Football. So thankfully, it doesn't seem like it's that serious of an injury. But this could open the door for Isaac Tesla. Against the Packers on Thanksgiving, he had a 94% route share. He had 2 targets. He caught both of them for 35 yards and a touchdown. And this week, they get the Cowboys. Dallas is the friendliest team to wide receivers this year by adjusted points allowed, and they've been specifically bad against perimeter wide receivers. Tesla, on the year according to PFF data, he's played 72% of his snaps out wide. So if St. Brown does miss this week, Isaac Tesla could see some fantasy production. Hold Terry McLaurin. Terry McLaurin's return from injury in week 13 was pretty awesome. He was a little bit limited. He ran around on just 59% of Washington's dropbacks, but he still saw season highs in target share at 31% and PPR points at 22.6. He saw a target on 44% of his routes run. That's nuts. Now, your inclination might be to sell that performance. It's not one that's easily repeatable. But McLaurin might be more of a buy than a sell. Not only could Jaden Daniels be back during the final parts of the fantasy season, but Washington, they're going to get the Giants, Eagles, and Cowboys in the fantasy playoffs. Now, Philly is an iffier matchup, but the Cowboys in week 17, McLaurin could be awesome in that matchup. I'd expect McLaurin's snap share and route share to rise over the coming weeks. We can't assume that his target share is going to be 31% each week, even with that increased snap share and route share. But it was really good to see him both healthy and productive. Add Adonai Mitchell. I mentioned on the podcast last week that Adonai Mitchell was almost a transaction prior to week 13. After his performance against the Falcons, I wish I would have kept him on that list. Since being dealt to the Jets, Mitchell has seen target shares of 24%, 26%, and 39%. He's coming off a game in week 13 where he caught 8 of 12 targets for 102 yards and a touchdown. So with Garrett Wilson still sidelined, he makes for an obvious get off the waiver wire this week. Add Devon Vele. So ever since Rashid Shaheed was traded to Seattle, Devon Vele has seen target shares of about 12%, 16%, and 24% in his 3 games played. He didn't have that much production until this past week against Miami. But against Miami, he had 23 PPR points. He caught all 8 of his targets for 93 yards and a touchdown. You're probably only going to play Vele in deeper leagues, but his performance and his recent usage, it makes him an option off the waiver wire this week. Buy Bucky Irving. To me, week 13 was a good one for Bucky Irving. not only did he finally get out there and play, but he also had pretty good usage. Irving's snap share was still a little bit low. It was 52%. It had been 75% to 80% pre-injury. But he walked away from that game against the Cardinals with an 81% running back rush share. And keep in mind, that was his first game back. You have to ask yourself, what happens with Bucky Irving when things really start cooking? Irving and the Bucs, they get the Saints, Falcons, Panthers, and Dolphins to close out the fantasy season. There's a very real chance that the Buccaneers see positive game scripts in each one of those games. And considering Irving's run game usage in Week 13, that means that the odds are good that he's going to see a nice amount of work. None of those matchups are frightening if you've got Bucky Irving, especially the latter three matchups, which are the Falcons, Panthers, and Dolphins, because those come in the fantasy playoffs. So Bucky Irving right now, to me, definitely more of a buy than a sell. Add Keaton Mitchell. So when we talk about handcuffs across the league, very rarely does Keaton Mitchell's name get brought up. And the likely reason for that is that he's undersized. Even with a Derrick Henry injury, Mitchell probably wouldn't get like 20 carries per game. He's a smaller player. But if Derrick Henry went down, Keaton Mitchell would definitely get more work in that backfield. Not only that, but Mitchell's starting to see a little bit more work in that Ravens backfield just naturally. Over his last 3 games, his route share has gone up to 19%. Prior to that, it was 5%. That's led to games with a 12% and 10% target share over his last 3. Justice Hill is on IR now too. Now, Mitchell hasn't been the running back to take on Justice Hill's role, which is that long down and distance work, that 2-minute work. That's been Rasheen Ali's job. But without Justice Hill, there's a little bit more room for work than before. And given Mitchell's speed, he only needs a few touches to be fantasy relevant. So you've sort of got a handcuff plus situation going on here. Although that plus, it's probably more applicable to deeper leagues. Sell Patrick Mahomes. Patrick Mahomes had a great Week 13 performance in fantasy football, there's no doubt. But it was also really predictable. The Chiefs faced the Cowboys, and no team in football has allowed more adjusted points to quarterbacks this year than the Dallas Cowboys. Things are not going to be that easy over the final 4 weeks of the fantasy season. The Chiefs get the Texans, Chargers, Titans, and Broncos. According to my adjusted fantasy points allowed numbers pre-Monday Night Football, those teams rank as the toughest, the 7th toughest, the 17th toughest, and the 2nd toughest matchups for quarterbacks by adjusted fantasy points allowed. Mahomes has gotten it done this year in fantasy, but he's faced 2 opponents recently who rank in the bottom 5 in adjusted fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks, Buffalo and Denver. In those games, he scored 10.5 and 13.3 standard fantasy points. He's also averaged fewer than 18 standard fantasy points per game over his last 4. He was at 24.5 points per game across his first 8 this season. It's not going to be an easy ride for Patrick Mahomes rest of season. Add Harold Fannin. Over the last month and a half of the football season, Harold Fannin's usage has kind of been awesome. It's just it's being buried because of the offense that he's in. He's averaging almost a 25% target share per game rate over his last 6. And he hit a season and career high 93% route participation against the 49ers this past Sunday. Fannin's still out there in 2/3 of Yahoo leagues, but his remaining schedule isn't that bad. They get the Titans, Bears, Bills, and Steelers. That Week 17 game against Pittsburgh, that's particularly interesting because Pittsburgh this year, they've been a top 5 matchup for tight ends by adjusted fantasy points allowed. Harold Fannin might not be a top 5 guy, but we shouldn't be leaving this kind of workload on the waiver wire, at least in my opinion. Add Darren Waller. Now, I know I've talked about Darren Waller quite a bit over the last month on this show, but I do think this is worth repeating, this transaction, for 2 reasons. First, he came out in Week 13, he essentially saw his standard Miami Dolphins workload. He had a 69% route share. That was a number that was pretty comparable to his 2 healthy games as a Dolphin in Week 5 and 6 earlier this season. He also had a 15% target share. The usage overall was not bad. And the second reason that you should be rostering Waller is the schedule. You've heard this before, but Miami has the best schedule in the fantasy playoffs for tight ends. That's because he gets the Steelers, the 4th best matchup for tight ends by adjusted points allowed, and then the Bengals, which is the best matchup. He gets them in Week 15 and 16. So at a minimum, he can help you get to the fantasy championship where he faces the Buccaneers. And the Buccaneers are mostly an average opponent for tight ends. So if Waller balls out in those two matchups, maybe you'll have confidence to even play him in week 17. At the very least, I do think he can be usable in that week 15 and 16 stretch. Add the Miami Dolphins defense. So how about this? The Dolphins have ranked as a top 7 fantasy defense in 4 of their last 5 games. And again, this is pre-Monday Night Football, so technically, some defense could jump them if they perform well tonight. I'm just recording it before Monday Night Football, so you guys can listen to this during your commute on Tuesday. Regardless, Miami's gotten it done against mediocre offenses, but that's exactly what they're going to face this week against New York. They get the Jets. Now, New York has been a worse matchup for opposing defenses now that Justin Fields is benched. But the Dolphins right now, they're road favorites, and that game has a low 42.5 point total. They're a pretty safe streaming option this week. Add the Detroit Lions defense. The Lions get the Cowboys this week, so you probably just heard that transaction and you're a little bit confused. But here's the thing. If you're looking at the playoffs, you might want to stash Detroit. They won't be that usable more than likely in week 15 against the Rams, but then in week 16, they're going to be home against the Steelers. And then in week 17, they're going to be on the road against the currently horrific Minnesota Vikings offense. So if you're in a league that stashes defenses, if you're in a league where only a few defenses are available, Detroit might be dropped this week because they get Dallas. And if they are dropped, you might want to consider picking them up and stashing them for week 16 and 17. That's it for today's show, though. Thanks to all of you for listening. If you yet subscribed to the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, make sure you are by searching for it pretty much anywhere podcasts can be found. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter and on Blue Sky at Late Round QB. Thanks for hanging in there while my voice sounded the way that it sounds. Greatly appreciate it. I'll talk to you guys tomorrow with the weekly 10 Trends episode.
PCs powered by Snapdragon X Elite processors are made to go the distance. With blazing fast performance, next-level efficiency, and multi-day battery life, Snapdragon processors are built to tackle it all, from highlight reel editing to intense player research, so you can be at the top of your game wherever the day takes you. Learn more at snapdragon.com/laptops. Snapdragon, the heart of your PC.
Battery life varies significantly based on device settings, usage, and other factors.
Hi, this is Gronk from Dudes on Dudes. I'm here to tell you about protecting your end zone with wet, extra large flushable Dude Wipes. Unlike dry wiping with toilet paper, Dude Wipes clear instead of smear. Wetter cleans better. Goodbye dingleberries. Goodbye itch and irritation. Plus, if you take Gronk-sized grumpies, or as I like to call them, Gronkies, baby wipes won't do. You need extra big Dude Wipes to handle the job. So don't fumble the ball with toilet paper. Stop being an a-hole to your b-hole and start using Dude Wipes. Available on Amazon and major retailers nationwide. Dude Wipes. Best clean, pants down.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.